Chinese President Xi Jinping touched down in Moscow within the last hour to begin his 3-day visit to the country and meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Now, this is Xi's first visit to Russia since the war in Ukraine began more than a year ago. And Beijing says the visit is, quote, a journey of peace, with Xi in the role of peacemaker, while Putin is looking for support for the war. However, U.S. officials ahead of the visit preemptively rejected any kind of ceasefire if it's proposed, saying it would only allow Russia time to regroup and build backup troops and resources. Correspondent Richard Kimber is on the ground in Hong Kong with details on President Xi's trip. And Richard, China says this is a meeting for peace, but really, have they given any indication of what they hope to accomplish really with this visit?
Well, it's been big on bold details about what China's aiming to achieve here, but pretty scant when it comes to explaining exactly how those details can be achieved. The latest from Beijing's foreign ministry says that this trip is a trip for friendship, cooperation and peace, and that China will continue to play what it calls a constructive role in promoting negotiations and peace talks between Vladimir Putin and the Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky. But there's no clear indication of exactly how China plans to make that happen. China has published a 12-point peace plan that it says is a framework through which a resolution can be reached in this conflict. But most of those details in that 12-point plan are also fairly general, with no specifics on what exactly Russia is expected to do and what concessions it can offer Ukraine in order to broker some kind of temporary agreement. And that's why there's so much skepticism from the likes of the US and its allies, both in what exactly can be achieved with this trip and also what China's longer-term intentions are, whether or not this is more of a brand-building exercise for China to put itself out there as a global mediator with these types of conflicts without necessarily having to get too involved in actually solving them. There's also concerns, of course, about what China's long-term relationship with Russia really means and what that could mean for the rest of the international world's efforts to try and broker conflicts of this kind in the future.
Other countries, including the U.S., are skeptical of this visit, and relations between the U.S. and China are already strained. Richard, how will this visit impact China's relationship with other countries?
Well, political analysts here say that President Xi is really walking a very fine line at the moment with trying to build himself up as a global statesman just a week after he's been unanimously voted into power for an historic third term leading the Chinese Communist Party, while also trying to maintain global credibility as a global mediator, attending this summit with President Putin just a day after, of course, the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for him. This is something that they say is unlikely most other world leaders would have felt confident to do given the circumstances, and this is why President Xi is really putting himself under some level of pressure to come up with a way of branding this trip as a success, not just in China's eyes, but of course globally, when there's so much skepticism about what's at stake here. There are expectations that certainly countries in Europe, such as France and Germany, still very much value their relationship with China on the economic front and don't want to see China ending up in the situation that Russia is now in, where it's been effectively left behind from global economic dialogue. And so that's the difficult situation that China finds itself in as it tries to make this trip a success.
All right, correspondent Richard Kimber reporting live from Hong Kong. Thank you. Now, this visit comes just 1 week after the director of national intelligence, Avril Haines, called the Chinese Communist Party the, quote, most consequential threat to U.S. national security, and that the Chinese Communist Party is increasingly convinced that it can only do so at the expense of U.S. power and influence.
Joining us now is someone that knows his way around the U.S. Intelligence Committee. Mike Rogers is a former Republican congressman from Michigan and the former chair of the U.S. Intelligence Committee, and now heads the policy group leadership to ensure the American dream, or LEAD. Mike, welcome to Morning Rush. Thank you so much for getting up early with us this morning. Let's get right into concerns you may have about Putin and Xi meeting in Moscow today. Would you say that this is adding fuel to the fire?
Oh, absolutely. And what we've watched China do over the last 5, 6, 7 years is strengthen ties with Russia. And so what we saw at the start of the Ukrainian invasion is China's willingness to do petrochemical deals in the Arctic and fill in on technology shortages for Moscow that they really needed for dual use, meaning they could use them for commercial or military action as well, buying their fuel and so their oil. And so what that means is that there is a kind of an unofficial lifeline from China to Putin that is allowing him to continue. Listen, if China came in that visit this week and said, hey, we're out, we're not buying your fuel, we're not helping you with technology needs, we're not sending you logistics help, we're not selling you any more drones, Putin would be in a lot of trouble. I don't think that's what's happening. What you're seeing is further cementing this relationship that is probably not great for Europe, and it's certainly not great for the United States interests as well.
And Mike, China has said it wants to play a role in mediating the conflict in Ukraine, but some in the Republican Party have questioned U.S. support for Ukraine, some even calling it a territorial dispute. What are your thoughts on anybody in the Republican Party, and even maybe a candidate taking a stance like that while running for president?
Well, I don't think isolationism wins. It never has. It has always cost us more problems. It led us into World War II in a way that wasn't, if small steps earlier than that may have prevented a big war at the end. Same with 9/11. We just decided to put our head in the sand. And if you look at what's going on in Russia, it's better that there is a small, insurance payment, if you will, allowing Ukrainians to defend themselves so it doesn't go into a broader conflict where U.S. troops are involved. And so I think that, again, isolationism has always been around in the United States. It flares its head every once in a while. I just think a good, thorough understanding of the facts and why this is so critically important to box in autocrats and dictators is really, really important. And so, again, I think that was clearly a misstep for a leading candidate to come out so early and say that he thinks it's a territorial dispute. I mean, you can't mention Russia without talking about China in the same sentence. They're both trying to, they have expansionist ideas. So they're both trying to understand what reactions would be, even in a place like Ukraine. So it sets us on a very unsolid path to show world leadership and to make people make better decisions. Meaning, if China wants to go into Taiwan, they would think a lot harder if we were all together knowing that, hey, we'll take steps before that happens to make it really complicated for you to do that. That's not an isolationist stand. That's a global leadership stand.